Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Dr. Owen Cassidy kept the mug close anyway, his fingers wrapped around the ceramic like an anchor to something real. November nights in the Mojave Desert carried a peculiar quality of silence, the kind that made you aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat. The Goldstone Deep Space Network facility hummed its usual lullaby of machines and cooling fans, a technological choir singing to the void. Owen had been alone on the night shift for 3 years. He preferred it that way. No small talk, no performance anxiety, just him and the universe, having their quiet conversation through arrays of metal and mathematics. At 11:47 p.m, the universe said something it had never said before. The first indication was subtle, a deviation in the background static so slight that Owen almost missed it. His eyes had been drifting towards sleep when the waveform display rippled. A stone dropped into still water. He sat forward, fully awake now, watching as the interference pattern resolved into something structured, deliberate. The signal emerged like a voice cutting through crowd noise, sharp peaks, measured intervals, the unmistakable signature of intelligent design. Owen's mouth went dry. His training took over, hands moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, even as his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Source coordinates locked, recording protocol initiated, frequency analysis running. The numbers made his hands freeze mid-keystroke. Origin, right ascension, 0 hours, 42 minutes, 44 seconds. Declination, positive 41 degrees, 16 arc minutes, 9 arc seconds. The direction of Andromeda. Distance 2.5 million light years, give or take the measurement error. His chair creaked as he leaned back, staring at the impossible data streaming across his monitors. At that distance, the signal would have had to be broadcast with power levels that made Earth's entire electrical grid look like a birthday candle, and it would have begun its journey when the ancestors of modern humans were still learning that stones made useful tools. The signal continued its patient pulse, each interval precise, each frequency shift intentional. Owen watched the chronometer tick forward, his breath shallow, his coffee forgotten. 16 minutes of structured transmission, and then, at exactly 12:03 a.m, it stopped. The silence that followed felt different than the silence before. Heavy, expectant. Owen's hand trembled as he reached for the phone. He dialed Dr. Linda Brennan's number and listened to it ring, each tone stretching out like pulled taffy. She answered on the 5th ring. "Cassidy, this better be important." "Linda." His voice sounded strange in his own ears, too calm, too level. "I need you to come in. Now. It's after midnight. I know what time it is. I also know what I'm looking at, and you need to see it." "Owen, it's artificial, extragalactic, and it's not random noise." The line went quiet. Not dead, just empty. The way the air feels before a thunderstorm. 25 minutes, she said, and hung up. Owen sat in the observation room, alone with the recording, watching the waveforms paint their impossible story across his screens. Somewhere in his chest, beneath the excitement and the fear and the professional detachment, a small voice whispered that he had just become a footnote in history. The man who first heard the voice from beyond. He tried not to think about why that voice might have been calling. Linda Brennan arrived in 19 minutes, which meant she'd broken several speed limits getting there. She burst into the observation room with her jacket on, inside out, and her hair still wet from a hasty shower, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Show me." Owen pulled up the recording and let it play. They stood in silence as the signal pulsed through the speakers, translated into audio frequencies the human ear could process. It sounded almost musical, a rhythm that felt both alien and strangely familiar. Linda's face went through several emotions in quick succession: disbelief, wonder, fear. She gripped the edge of the console. "Source verification?" "Triple-checked. It's coming from Andromeda. The signal strength alone suggests technology we can't even theorize about." Could it be a hoax? Someone spoofing the coordinates? I thought about that, ran every verification protocol I know. The quantum signature is wrong for anything terrestrial. This really did travel through intergalactic space. This is real, Linda. She pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. "We need to activate the emergency protocol. Get the senior team in here. Once you make that call, this stops being ours." "It was never ours, Owen. This is bigger than both of us, bigger than everyone." She made the call. Within 2 hours, the small observation room had transformed into something between a command center and a war room. 8 senior staff members crowded around the displays, their faces illuminated by the glow of monitors showing the impossible made real. Dr. Raymond Torres, the facility's chief astronomer, had gone pale. "The power requirements," he kept saying, running calculations on his tablet. "Just to reach us at this distance with this signal clarity, they'd need to harness the energy output of multiple stars. We're decades away from even understanding how that would work." "Which confirms it's not human-made," said Dr. Helen Cartwright, the facility's lead radio specialist. She'd been quiet until now, just listening, absorbing. "We couldn't fake this if we wanted to. The physics are beyond us." "So are the implications," Owen added quietly. "Whatever sent this did so 2.5 million years ago, when early hominids were still figuring out how to walk upright, when saber-toothed cats still roamed. They sent this message knowing they would never hear a response, knowing they might be sending it to empty space, to a universe where no one was listening." "Unless," Linda said, and everyone turned to look at her, "unless they knew, somehow. Unless they had reason to believe someone would be here, someone would be listening. Someone would need to hear what they had to say." The weight of that settled over the room like ash. "We need experts," Torres said finally. "Linguists, cryptographers. If there's a message encoded in this signal, we need to decode it. And we need to classify this," Linda added, "immediately, before word leaks. We control the narrative, or the narrative controls us." The bureaucratic machinery ground into motion, forms signed, protocols activated. The discovery that might reshape humanity's understanding of its place in the universe became, officially, Project 7291 Whisper, buried under classification levels that made it invisible to anyone without the right clearances. Owen went home as the sun rose over the desert, but he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing that signal, those measured pulses cutting through the cosmic static. A voice from the deep past, or maybe from the deep future, depending on how you calculated the relativistic effects of light-speed communication. A voice that had travelled across unimaginable distances to reach Earth at this exact moment in time. He wondered if that timing was coincidence or something else entirely. Dr. Naomi Frost arrived from MIT on the 4th day, and Owen knew immediately she was different from the usual academics who drifted through government projects. She was 42, according to her file, but carried herself with the coiled energy of someone half that age. Her reputation preceded her. 3 major decryption breakthroughs for the NSA, 2 published books on information theory, and a habit of solving supposedly unsolvable problems. She spent her first 48 hours just listening to the signal on repeat, headphones covering her ears, eyes closed, fingers occasionally twitching as if she were conducting an invisible orchestra. The team learned to work around her, this strange silent presence in the corner who seemed to be having a private conversation with the universe. On her third day, Owen found her in the lab at 2 a.m, surrounded by what looked like organized chaos. Notebooks covered every available surface, filled with sketches and symbols and diagrams that seemed to shift between languages, moving from English to notation to something that looked almost like musical composition. "You're going to give yourself a migraine," he said from the doorway. Naomi didn't look up. "Too late. Had it since hour 12. Coffee?" He poured 2 cups from the ancient pot in the corner and sat across from her. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in the lines around her eyes, but also something else. Excitement. Fear. The look of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at something both terrifying and beautiful. "I think I understand what they did," she said softly. "The builders of this message. They faced an impossible problem. How do you communicate with someone who might not share any common reference points? No shared language, no shared culture, no shared biology even. You might not even process sensory information the same way. So what did they do? They built a Rosetta Stone into the signal itself. The message teaches you how to read it as you decode it. It starts with the most universal language possible, prime numbers, things that can't be mistaken for natural phenomena. Then it uses those primes as building blocks, constructing increasingly complex information structures. Each layer builds on the last, creating a framework that lets you understand the next level." She pulled out one of her notebooks, showing him a diagram that looked like a tree growing upward, branches splitting and dividing. "It's elegant. Beautiful, really. They're teaching us their language through the structure of the communication itself. How long until you crack it?" Naomi finally met his eyes, and what he saw there made his stomach tighten. "I already have. The first layer, anyway. Owen, they didn't just send us a message. They sent us their sky." The team gathered in the main conference room, and Naomi walked them through her discovery with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of a poet. The primary display showed a 3-dimensional reconstruction, stars scattered through space in unfamiliar configurations. "This is a stellar map," she explained, manipulating the display to show different angles, "but the positions are wrong. These aren't the stars as we see them now." Torres frowned, leaning forward. "Then, what are they?" "They're stars as they appeared 2.5 million years ago, from a perspective within Andromeda. This is their night sky. They gave us this as proof, as authentication. By showing us stellar positions that we can verify through our own astronomical records, they're proving that this message really did come from where and when it claims to come from." Helen Cartwright's voice was barely a whisper. "They wanted us to know it was real." "They needed us to know," Naomi corrected. "Because what comes next, they needed us to believe it." Over the following week, Naomi unraveled the next layers of the message, and the excitement in the room gradually curdled into something darker. The signal contained more than astronomical data. Embedded within its structure were images, reconstructed through binary encoding into visual information that assembled itself, pixel by painstaking pixel. The first images showed structures, not buildings in any sense that human architecture would recognize, but constructions on a scale that made Earth's greatest monuments look like children's toys. Towers that seemed to pierce beyond atmosphere into space itself. Orbital rings threading between worlds. Structures in the void between planets. Massive geometric forms that could only be habitats for millions of beings. "They were so far ahead of us," Helen said, her voice full of wonder and something like grief. "Look at what they built. Look at what they achieved." The chronological sequence continued, showing the civilization's expansion across their solar system, their mastery of space and energy and time, a species that had reached heights humanity still dreamed of, building wonders among the stars. Then the sequence changed. New objects appeared in their images, not built by the civilization but arriving from elsewhere. The perspective shifted frantically, as if the original senders had been documenting something they didn't understand, something they feared. The objects were massive, dwarfing even the civilization's greatest structures. They appeared in orbit around the civilization's worlds, positioning themselves throughout the system with what looked like deliberate precision. "What are we looking at?" Torres asked, his voice tight. "I don't know," Naomi admitted. "The scale is difficult to judge without more context, but based on the stellar background, I think these objects are the size of small moons, maybe larger." The images became more fragmented after that, more desperate. The magnificent structures going dim, the orbital constructions falling silent, emptiness spreading like an infection across the frames. The final images showed almost nothing, just scattered points of light where once there had been a thriving civilization spanning multiple worlds. Then, at the very end, coordinates, not pointing to the civilization's location in Andromeda, but pointing outward, toward a region of space that included Earth's neighborhood. Owen felt ice crystallize in his veins. "They're pointing at us." "Not precisely," Naomi said. "They didn't have exact coordinates for Earth, but they knew this sector of the galaxy was here. They knew someone might be listening, and they wanted to warn us." She pulled up the final segment of translation, the piece she'd been working on for 72 straight hours, sustained by coffee and the kind of manic energy that comes from staring into an abyss. Her voice shook slightly as she read it aloud. "They came from the silence between stars. We built wonders. We reached for the heavens. They noticed. Do not respond. Do not broadcast. Do not let them know you are here." Nobody spoke. The hum of cooling fans and computer processors filled the silence, machines oblivious to the weight of what had just been revealed. Raymond Torres was the first to move, standing up and walking to the window, pressing his forehead against the glass. "We've been broadcasting for over a century. Radio, television, radar, Voyager's golden record. Deliberate messages to the stars. We've been shouting into the void for generations." "And someone just told us," Helen said quietly, "that shouting is what gets you killed." Linda stood, her face carefully neutral, but Owen had worked with her long enough to see the fear beneath. "I need to escalate this. NASA Administrator, Department of Defense. If this is real, if there's even a possibility that broadcasting attracts something dangerous, every government on Earth needs to know." "And if we tell them?" Owen asked. "What happens then?" "Then we hope they listen. We hope they act. We hope we're not already too late." The weekend that followed blurred into a haze of analysis and reanalysis, checking and triple-checking every piece of data, looking for any possibility that this was elaborate deception or misinterpretation. Owen barely left the facility, surviving on vending machine food and fitful naps in his office chair. But the data held. The signal was real. The translation was accurate. The warning was clear. Somewhere in Andromeda, millions of years ago, a civilization had reached the peak of technological achievement. They had built cities among the stars. They had mastered energies humans couldn't yet imagine. They had become something magnificent. And then something had noticed them. Something had come for them. Something had ended them so thoroughly that only their warning remained. A message in a bottle hurled across the intergalactic ocean in desperate hope. Owen pulled up a visualization of Earth's radio bubble, the expanding sphere of electromagnetic radiation spreading outward from the planet at light speed. Over a century of signals, now extending more than 100 light years in all directions. Every TV broadcast, every radio transmission, every radar ping, propagating endlessly through space. An announcement to the universe. We are here. He was still staring at that visualization when Monday morning arrived with the sound of vehicles outside. The black SUVs came at dawn. Owen watched from the second-floor observation window as they filed through the security checkpoint. a motorcade of serious vehicles carrying serious people. Men and women in suits that cost more than his monthly salary, wearing earpieces and expressions that suggested they'd seen classified briefings that would give normal people nightmares. By 9 in the morning, the facility had been locked down. By 10, the original team was being separated, isolated, questioned. Owen found himself in a conference room with 3 people whose credentials identified them as Department of Defense, but whose specific roles remained carefully vague. They asked him questions he'd already answered. They made him walk through the discovery again and again, looking for inconsistencies, testing his credibility. They wanted to know if he'd told anyone, if he'd made copies, if he understood the implications for national security. Owen answered truthfully for everything except the copies. The encrypted drive hidden in his apartment was his insurance policy, his guarantee that the truth wouldn't simply vanish into classified archives. The takeover was swift and absolute. By Tuesday, Project 7291, Whisper had been compartmentalized under protocols Owen hadn't known existed. The original team scattered like leaves in wind. Naomi was taken to a secure facility in Virginia, her expertise too valuable to waste but too dangerous to leave unsupervised. Linda was reassigned to a liaison position at JPL, busy work that kept her away from anything that mattered. Torres and Helen and the others disappeared into different projects, different buildings, different lives bound by non-disclosure agreements with teeth. Owen was assigned to a new team, still working on the signal, but now under military oversight. The scientists who joined him were brilliant, cleared to the highest levels, and visibly frightened by what they were uncovering, because the analysis continued deeper and more thorough than before. With resources the academic team never could have accessed, they dug into every layer of the message, extracting implications that made the original warning seem almost optimistic. Dr. Philip Ashford presented his findings 3 weeks after the government takeover. He was a theoretical astrophysicist, pulled from a DoD think tank, a man who specialized in calculating nightmare scenarios. His presentation had the careful, measured tone of someone trying to remain calm while describing the end of the world. "We've analyzed the historical content embedded in the message," he began, pulling up a holographic display of the Milky Way, specifically the sections showing what the Andromedan civilization called the silenced regions. Red markers appeared scattered throughout the galaxy, 17 of them distributed with no obvious pattern. The civilization that sent the warning wasn't just theorizing about a threat, they'd been studying it. They'd identified specific regions of space where they detected no signs of advanced civilization. No radio signals, no industrial signatures, no evidence of technology. These are the dead zones. "Could just mean nobody evolved there," someone suggested. "That was our first thought," Ashford agreed, "but the statistical distribution is wrong. These regions have stellar populations, consistent with planetary formation. They should have roughly the same probability of developing life as anywhere else. But they're silent, completely silent." He zoomed in on one of the markers. "More troubling, we can detect fossil evidence of what might have been civilizations in several of these regions. Slight atmospheric anomalies on certain exoplanets, residual electromagnetic signatures, things that suggest industrial activity in the past, but nothing current. As if something was there once, and then stopped." 17 dead zones, Owen said, his voice hollow. "That's not coincidence." "No," Ashford agreed. "It's a pattern. A pattern that suggests something moving through the galaxy, identifying technological civilizations and silencing them. The time intervals between silencing events, based on what we can extract from the message, range from 50,000 to several 100,000 years. Whatever this is, it operates on geological timescales. But it's systematic, methodical, patient." The conference room felt like a tomb. The Andromedan civilization studied this pattern For what must have been generations, Ashford continued, they watched dead zones appear. They tried to understand what caused them, and their conclusion, the one they died trying to warn us about, is that advanced civilizations are noticed, that reaching for space, building megastructures, broadcasting signals, these things attract attention, the wrong kind of attention. From what? Helen demanded, her voice cracking slightly. They didn't know. Or if they knew, they couldn't explain it in a way we could understand, but they knew enough to be terrified, enough to spend their final moments warning others. Owen stared at the holographic galaxy, at the 17 red markers scattered like bloodstains across the spiral arms. How long between silencing events? Variable, but the pattern suggests something visiting different regions of the galaxy in irregular intervals, sometimes tens of thousands of years apart, sometimes hundreds of thousands, but always eventually arriving, always eventually noticing. And Earth has been broadcasting for over a century. Yes, our earliest radio transmissions are now over 100 light-years away, touching thousands of star systems. If something is listening, if something tracks technological civilizations by their electromagnetic signatures. Ashford didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The debate that followed was fierce and desperate. Some argued for immediate global action, shutting down all broadcasts, recalling deep space probes, going dark before whatever hunted in the void could triangulate Earth's position. Others pointed out that the signals were already out there, irretrievable, propagating through space at light speed. Going silent now might accomplish nothing but crippling human technology. Owen listened and thought about the Andromedan civilization's final moments. They'd achieved everything humans still dreamed of. They'd built wonders that made Earth's greatest accomplishments look primitive. They'd reached the stars. Something had noticed. He volunteered for the night shifts again, unable to stay away from the monitoring equipment, even as the project was sealed tighter with each passing day. The facility had changed, transformed from a scientific research station into something closer to a military installation. Armed guards at every entrance, biometric scanners, secure protocols that required 3 forms of authentication just to access the basic systems. The spontaneous collaboration of the early days had been replaced by rigid compartmentalization, need-to-know basis, limited information sharing, the joy of discovery strangled by the necessities of national security. Owen understood why. He even agreed with most of it, but he hated what they'd lost. At 2:17 a.m. on December 3rd, exactly 3 weeks after the original signal, the universe spoke again. Owen was monitoring the deep space arrays when the alert triggered. The same frequency, the same source coordinates, a new transmission cutting through the background static. His heart lurched in his chest as he initiated recording protocols, routing the signal through every available receiver. But even as his hands flew across the keyboard, he could tell something was different. The signal was shorter, faster. The measured, careful pulses of the first transmission had been replaced by something frantic, desperate, like the difference between a carefully composed letter and words scrawled by a shaking hand. The transmission lasted less than 2 minutes before cutting off abruptly, leaving nothing but static. Owen sat frozen, staring at the displays. His breath caught in his throat. Then he hit the emergency alert, and within minutes the facility exploded into activity. Naomi was brought back from Virginia on a military transport, arriving at Goldstone at 7 in the morning with armed escorts and orders to decrypt the new message immediately. She looked exhausted, thinner than Owen remembered, her eyes carrying shadows that suggested sleep had become a distant memory. But the moment she saw the new signal, something in her sharpened. She was a scientist again, confronting a mystery that demanded to be solved, everything else falling away. She worked for 8 hours straight, the team watching in silence as she coaxed meaning from the desperate pulses. The linguistic framework from the first message provided the key, the language already established, but what emerged wasn't another carefully constructed warning. It was a scream. Naomi's voice shook as she read the translation aloud. "They are here. They found us. Oh God, they're..." Nothing after that. The signal cut off mid-transmission, mid-word, mid-thought, like a voice interrupted by something sudden and final. The conference room erupted in chaos, everyone talking over each other, theories and speculation colliding, but Owen sat silent, his mind working through an impossible problem. "It doesn't make sense," he said finally, his voice cutting through the noise. Everyone turned to look at him. "That signal just travelled 2.5 million years to reach us. Whatever happened to that civilization happened before humans existed. Before mammals dominated Earth. Before dinosaurs even. They've been dead for millions of years." He stood pacing, his thoughts racing. "So, how did we just receive a message that sounded immediate, real time, like it was sent seconds before they died?" The room went quiet as the implications crystallized. Ashford spoke carefully, like a man defusing a bomb he didn't fully understand. Unless they developed faster-than-light communication, quantum entanglement on a massive scale, instantaneous transmission across any distance. "Which would mean," Naomi added, her voice barely audible, "that what we just heard wasn't an echo from millions of years ago. It was their actual end. Happening now, or recently. If they achieved instantaneous communication, then time becomes meaningless. That final message could have been sent hours ago, days ago, but not millions of years ago." Owen felt like the floor had dropped out from under him, so something didn't wipe them out in the distant past. Something wiped them out now, right now. While we were listening, we just heard them die across the universe in real time. Nobody had an answer. They sat in the conference room as morning light spilled across the Mojave Desert, contemplating a universe that suddenly felt much smaller and infinitely more dangerous. The decision came from so high up the chain of command that Owen never learned who actually made it. Operation Dark Sky was implemented within 72 hours, a coordinated global effort involving every major space agency, every government with broadcasting capabilities, every organization that sent signals into space. The cover story was solar activity, an unexpected increase in radiation that required temporary reduction of certain broadcasts to prevent damage to satellites and communication infrastructure. The public accepted it because people generally accepted official explanations for technical problems they didn't fully understand. But behind the cover story, humanity began to go dark. Non-essential broadcasts into deep space were systematically reduced. Radio telescope operations were modified to minimize leakage. New protocols were implemented for everything from satellite communications to deep space probe transmissions. It wasn't total silence that would have collapsed modern civilization, but it was a dimming, a reduction. Humanity lowering its voice, hoping it hadn't already been heard. Owen watched it happen from inside the compartmentalized program, now buried under so many classification levels. It effectively didn't exist. The original team had been scattered completely. Torres reassigned to a survey project in Chile. Helen transferred to a teaching position at Caltech. Naomi somewhere in the Virginia area, her exact location classified even from him. Linda managed to arrange one final meeting before the project was completely sealed. They met at a small diner in Barstow. Just two colleagues having lunch, talking about weather and traffic and anything except the truth that bound them together. "They're going to bury this," Owen said quietly, stirring sugar into coffee he had no intention of drinking. "In 50 years, someone will find a footnote in a declassified document, an anomalous signal, and they'll never know what it really meant." Linda looked older than she had 2 months ago. "Maybe that's for the best. What good does panic do? What good does it do to tell 8 billion people that we might have attracted the attention of something we can't fight or understand? that our radio signals might have painted a target on our planet, it would be chaos, the end of everything we've built, just from fear alone. Or it would unite us, give us purpose, a reason to work together instead of fighting each other over borders and resources and ideologies. You have more faith in humanity than I do. They sat in silence, picking at food neither of them wanted. Then Linda leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. They found something else, something they kept compartmentalized even from you. Owen's pulse quickened. What? Deep surveys of the intergalactic voids. The empty spaces between galaxies where there's supposed to be nothing but a few scattered atoms and dark matter. Except the gravitational readings don't match, there are anomalies. Massive ones. Things that could be structures positioned in the void where they'd be invisible against the background of empty space. She slid a thin folder across the table, unmarked and unremarkable. This is everything I could get before they locked me out completely. It's not much, but it's something. Keep it safe, keep it hidden. Because if we survive this, if we go dark in time and whatever's out there loses interest, someone needs to remember. Someone needs to remember why. Owen took the folder, feeling its weight like a physical burden. The ones who survive are the ones who learn to hide. Exactly. 6 months later, Owen Cassidy no longer existed in any meaningful way. The man living under that name worked in software development in Seattle, had no social media presence, and kept his apartment security tight enough to make paranoid people seem casual. Sometimes, in the deepest hours of night, he would take out the encrypted drive and review the files he absolutely shouldn't have kept. The signal, the translation, the warning, the evidence of something vast and patient hiding in the cosmic voids. The facility at Goldstone had been renovated. Most of the original team scattered to different projects under different names, bound by non-disclosure agreements with criminal penalties and the certain knowledge that breaking silence would accomplish nothing but their own destruction. Naomi sent him one message from an email address that stopped existing within minutes. 3 words. Still listening. Stay safe. He maintained contact with 2 others from the original team through encrypted channels and anonymous networks. They monitored amateur astronomy forums obsessively, watching for patterns, looking for warnings, scanning for any indication that the emptiness they'd glimpsed was still approaching. The question haunted all of them. Did we go silent in time, or had something already heard Earth's century of shouting? Was something even now making its way toward this small blue world, drawn by signals like a shark to blood? Owen would stand at his apartment window at night, looking up at the stars barely visible through the city lights, and wonder how many of those pinpricks had once been home to civilizations like humanity's. How many had built and dreamed and reached for the heavens, never knowing they were being heard? How many had received warnings like Earth's, and how many had heeded them in time? One night in late June, 7 months after the discovery, Owen was reviewing the files Linda had given him when his secure phone buzzed. A message from one of his 2 remaining contacts. Just a link to an amateur astronomy forum. He clicked through and felt his blood turn to ice. Multiple independent observers in the southern hemisphere were reporting unusual signals from deep space. Nothing coherent, just interference patterns. But the frequency characteristics matched the profile of the Andromedan transmission. And the source coordinates weren't from Andromeda. They were from a different galaxy, an elliptical galaxy in the direction of Sculptor. 2 million light years away in an entirely different direction. Owen pulled up the coordinates and cross-referenced them against the facility's archived star catalogues. His hands were shaking so badly he had to stop and take several deep breaths before continuing. The signal wasn't structured. It was degraded, fragmented like something that had been repeating for so long it had begun to decay. But buried in the noise, one phrase kept emerging, over and over. Do not respond, another warning. from another galaxy, from another civilization that had learned too late what broadcasting into the void would attract. Owen sat in his darkened apartment staring at the screen and understood with perfect clarity that Earth wasn't the first to receive the warning. Somewhere out in the vast emptiness, civilizations were still dying, still sending their final desperate messages, still hoping someone would listen and learn from their mistake. And somewhere in that same emptiness, something was still hunting. His phone buzzed again. Another contact, another amateur astronomer, posting about signal anomalies, this time from Virgo, 3 million light years away. The same message, do not respond. How many civilizations had died trying to warn others? How many warnings were propagating through the universe at light speed? Messages in bottles from species that no longer existed. And how many of those warnings were arriving too late, reaching civilizations that had already been broadcasting for decades or centuries, that had already been noticed? Owen opened a secure connection to his 2 remaining contacts. They needed to know. They needed to document this. Because even if the world never learned the truth, even if Operation Dark Sky succeeded, and humanity somehow survived by hiding in the cosmic shadows, someone needed to remember. Not just Andromeda's warning. All of them. Every desperate message sent by dying civilizations across millions of years and millions of light years, all saying the same thing. We were here, we built wonders, we reached for the stars, and something noticed. He spent the next hour typing up his analysis, documenting the new signals, the pattern emerging from multiple galaxies, a coordinated warning system perhaps, or just the statistical inevitability of civilizations making the same mistake, sending the same desperate messages, hoping someone would listen. He sent the report to his contacts through encrypted channels, adding to the growing archive of information that officially didn't exist. Then, he closed his laptop and walked to the window, pressing his hand against the glass, looking up at the sky. The city lights drowned out most of the stars, but he could still see a few, bright points against the emptiness. Somewhere up there, 2.5 million years ago, someone had looked at those same stars and made the decision to send a warning. They had used their final moments, their last precious time, before the end, to try to save species they would never meet in the desperate hope that someone would listen. Someone had listened. Owen and his team had heard them. They had decoded the warning. They had understood the threat. But understanding didn't mean survival. The radio bubble continued its expansion, Earth's electromagnetic signature spreading through space at the speed of light, unstoppable and eternal. A century of human achievement encoded in radio waves. Television shows and radar pings and satellite transmissions, all of it propagating outward in an ever-growing sphere. First contact, humanity had always assumed, would be momentous. A message received. A dialogue begun. 2 civilizations reaching across the void to share knowledge and wonder. But what if first contact wasn't a message received? What if it was simply being heard? Owen thought about the gravitational anomalies Linda had mentioned. Massive structures in the intergalactic voids, positioned in the empty spaces where they could watch galaxies without being seen. Things waiting in the emptiness between stars, patient and ancient and utterly alien, listening. His phone buzzed one final time, an unknown number. A message that appeared on his screen for exactly 3 seconds before deleting itself, leaving no trace it had ever existed. 2 words that made his heart stop. They're coming. Owen stared at his phone, then at the window, then at the stars beyond. Somewhere in the vast expanse of space, something ancient and patient continued its work, listening for the telltale signs of technological civilization, hunting for species that made themselves visible. The great filter scientists had theorized was what prevented civilizations from becoming spacefaring. Some barrier between primitive life and galactic colonization that most species never crossed. But what if the filter wasn't behind humanity? What if it was ahead, waiting in the emptiness? And the only species who survived were the ones who learned to hide before it was too late. Earth's century of signals was already out there, spreading through space, touching more systems every day. An expanding announcement to anything that listened. We are here. And in the emptiness between stars, in the vast cosmic voids where nothing should exist, something had been listening for a very long time. Owen stood at his window as the city slept around him. 8 million people dreaming their human dreams, unaware that their ancestors' voices were still echoing through space, still propagating outward, still shouting into an emptiness that might not be empty at all. The only question that remained was whether humanity had gone silent in time, or whether something vast and patient had already heard Earth's voice across the void and decided to investigate. The answer, Owen suspected, wouldn't be long in coming, because the universe, he'd learned, was very good at keeping secrets, but it was even better at punishing those who spoke too loudly into the void. He closed his eyes and saw the final image from Andromeda, a civilization of millions or billions reduced to silence, emptiness spreading across their worlds like spilled ink. And he wondered if, somewhere in the distant future, another civilization would receive Earth's warning, sent in humanity's final moments, and whether they would listen any better than humans had. Do not respond, the message would say. Do not broadcast. Do not let them know you are here. But by then, Owen knew, it would already be too late. It was always too late. The warnings always arrived after civilizations had already made the fatal mistake of announcing their existence to the cosmos. That was the cruelest joke of all. Not that the universe was empty, but that it was full of voices screaming warnings that would never be heard in time. He opened his eyes and looked at the stars one last time before closing the curtains. Somewhere out there, in the emptiness between galaxies, something was listening. And somewhere closer than anyone wanted to admit, it was coming.